Okay, so we move to our first panel on this conference on overcoming challenges to fight climate change. Today we have, a great set of panelists. First of all, Azucena Arbeleche has been the Minister of the Economy and Finance of Uruguay since March 1st, 2020. Before that, she was an independent consultant in debt management and also the head of the debt management unit in Uruguay in previous government. She has been the president of the Development Committee of the World Bank until very recently, and she has led one of the most advanced ESG financing strategy in emerging markets. Secondly, Helen Meirovich is the head of Climate Change Advisory Service Division at the Inter-American Development Bank, the BidInvest, which she joined in 2017. She's responsible for developing innovative strategies and implementing solutions to reduce the impact of climate change. She has extensive experience in creating favorable conditions for environmentally friendly investments and leveraging international climate funds that help channel private investment to the region. Third, Lupin Rahman is an executive vice president and portfolio manager in the New York office of PIMCO Investment Management. She oversees PIMCO's sovereign credit investment on the emerging markets portfolio management team and is responsible for environmental, social, and governance integration across PIMCO's investment strategies. Prior to joining PIMCO in 2018, she spent 5 years at the International Monetary Fund as an emerging market macroeconomist. Dan Selico is chair of the governing board of JP Morgan Development Finance Institution, where I think he used to lead a team, As of 2 weeks ago, I'm not. Okay, but that's what he used to do. Now, he will tell us what he's doing now, but he used to lead this team. He put together this division at JP Morgan, and he also led JP Morgan's business with public sector clients, such as central banks, sovereign wealth funds, public pensions, governments, and their agencies, and international financial institutions. From 2015 to 2022, he co-founded and co-headed a global team responsible for providing financing, structuring, and advisory services to the firm's clients, involving sponsoring and investing in infrastructure around the world. And he also used to be, I think it's called the deputy president or the first vice president of the IDB many administrations ago with President Luis Alberto Moreno. I don't have it here, but that's well, that's where we met. So it tells a little bit, not only his age, but also mine. So with that, we will start. First, Azucena will speak a little bit from the point of view of a country, how she and her team have actually designed and implemented an ESG strategy. And secondly, using her hat that she previously had as the chairperson of the Development Committee, her ideas on how IFIs should be moving forward this agenda. Then Helen will give us her ideas on how the IDB and other IFIs can help in structuring financing to actually leverage the private markets to significantly multiply the effects of policy on climate change. And then we will hear from two market participants, from Lupin's side, from a portfolio manager's point of view, actually how do you design a strategy to basically help mobilize this fund, and from an investment market perspective, how do you put these two sides together, the clients that have the funds and the clients that need the funds to implement significant infrastructure investment, and within infrastructure geared towards climate change. So with that, I'll give the floor to Azucena, and then I will just control the flow of speeches.
And this is the difficult part, how to Hello? Yes, so I got the difficult part done. Okay, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. It's really an honor to be here, to be in this audience and in this panel, and to share with this audience with you. Thank you, Alejandro, for the invitation. So let me share a little bit about Uruguay's case. Our government is very much committed to climate action and conservation of nature. So from the beginning of this administration, in our budget law, we added an article where we spoke about mainstreaming environmental policy into our economic policy. So we can't see this as two different policies. They both have to come together. Uruguay has taken concrete steps in this environmental and economic policy. And let me at this point tell you that for the Ministry of Economy and Finance, it's not only important to address environmental challenges because we care about our people, our citizens, the citizens from the whole planet, but as economic policymaker, we have to consider that we are facing a complete change in the paradigm in which goods are produced, services are traded, investment is made. So if as policymaker, as economic policymaker, our ultimate goal is to have more jobs and well-paid jobs, then we have to look forward and incorporate today environmental issues in the way we invest, in the way we produce, in the way we trade. So it's also, that's very important with that perspective, is that we sit in the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and together with the other ministries, the whole government pushes forward with this idea. So Alejandro was asking what we did in terms of financing and this idea of incorporating environmental policy into economic policy. We think that it's very strategic to align incentives so that the cost of funding is related to the environmental behavior that a country does. And right from the beginning, and now I'm changing, I'm sharing the two views, my hat as Minister of Economy in Uruguay and my former hat as chair of the DC, because really with the team, we discussed both topics at the same time. So back in 2021, we presented in the co-chair that I had with Mia Motley, Uruguay presented the idea that the different countries, when they contribute to the production of global public goods, they should receive a different treatment. And again, this treatment should be in terms of different access or better access to markets, but also different and better cost of funding. So with this idea, we worked in Uruguay for many months, and finally, at the end of last year, we issued a global bond, a sovereign sustainability-linked bond in the capital markets, where the interest rate of the bond is linked to two key performance indicators that come from the Paris Agreement. So from all the NDCs 1 that we had, that Uruguay presented in the Paris Agreement, we chose two of them. The first one is the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and the second one is the conservation of native forestry. These indicators were chosen after a lots of conversation with investors, and especially the second one that speaks about biodiversity and conserving nature. This was something that we hadn't thought about at the beginning, but it came from the investors as a very important point. So the scheme that we have in the bond is a two-way coupon. If Uruguay outperforms the targets, then we have a step down. That means we pay less interest payment. If Uruguay, on the contrary, doesn't reach the targets, we have a step up and we have to pay a higher interest rate. That is the way that the bond works. Previously, early in the year, Chile had issued a bond which only had a step up. In the case of Uruguay, we chose a two-way coupon, so that there's a step up and also a step down. And we were very successful with the bond in terms of pricing, in terms of the demand that we faced. In fact, we had many new accounts. I would say 25% of the investors were new accounts to Uruguay. So that was very productive also in terms of diversifying the investor base. And we did a lot of work with other, with different multilateral institutions, because of course you have to be very careful to choose your indicators. You have to have a second party opinion that says how ambitious your indicators are. You have to have somebody measuring, verifying, validating what you measure. So we worked a lot with the United Nations Development Program in this regard. This is in terms of our bond issued last year. Let me now go back to the second part of what I understood of Alejandro's question. How can we link this to, how can we scale up this idea not only for Uruguay, but for the challenges that we are facing in terms of environment that my colleague Mia previously pointed out? Well, we think that we could have a similar instrument in terms of not a bond, but a loan dispersed from a multilateral institution. And in that regard, we have been working for many months now with the World Bank. We are also working with the IDB and maybe with some other institution in bringing up a similar design. In the case of the World Bank, we are thinking of an instrument where that I would say that fits perfectly well to what the World Bank has presented as the evolution framework of the World Bank Group. This is something that this week during the IMF and World Bank spring meetings, we have been discussing a lot so far, and we will continue. This afternoon, we will have the development committee, and this is the topic that's going to be in the agenda. How can the World Bank help in addressing the climate challenges, in addressing climate mitigation and adaptation? So the instrument, this financial instrument that we have been working with the staff of the World Bank is a loan, again, linked, the interest rate of the loan is linked to two key performance indicators. In this case, we are working with the reduction of methane emission from the livestock, and again with natural forestry, with the conservation of natural forestry. The interesting feature in this case is that we are not having a two-way coupon, but we have only a step-down coupon. So for when a country contributes to the global public good, if a country fulfills the commitment that has been chosen as the key performance indicator, they have to pay less interest. We don't have a pay up. And this is very important. We only speak about positive incentives. And this makes a whole difference when we look at this from the point of view of the multilateral. It's also very important who pays for this pay down. Because if the World Bank disperses a loan to Uruguay, if Uruguay meets the targets, then Uruguay will pay less interest. Well, what happens with the balance sheet of the bank? Who pays that? And this is a very important discussion that's also going on this week and will continue. Currently, we are working so that the step down is funded by a fund that the World Bank has, a global public good fund. And we hope that that fund is replenished by outside countries, by donors. So my point is that we are working so that the funds don't come from the balance sheet of the multilateral. Why? Because if it is the balance sheet of the multilateral that supports that step down, that means that all shareholders equally, they are all contributing for this step down. And we want those countries that are more developed, that have higher income, that have contributed more in the emissions, in greenhouse gas emissions, to contribute more now in addressing the climate problem. So we think that this instrument fits very well to the current challenges. and fits very well to the evolution framework that is currently discussed. So there are other characteristics. I think that I will stop here and give way to other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Azucena. And I think also it's a very, hopefully it will be a very clever way to channel the resources that the international community is putting in several funds, and it has been hard for emerging markets and developing countries to trying to access them through the kind of structures that the World Bank is putting together and making it easier for the whole community of developing economies to access them. But with that, let me turn it to Helene to talk about challenges in the region and how the IDB is helping them, and IDB Invest is helping them to overcome it.
Thank you, Alejandro, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel. Similar to Mia Motley, I was a graduate here at Georgetown, so it's nice to be back at Georgetown. So let me just start by saying that, when we think about Latin America and the Caribbean and the challenges of climate change, of course we know that the region has been hit by droughts, by wildfires, by rising temperatures, by changing precipitation patterns that has impacted even crop production, even in my own country, in Argentina. And so the recent report of the IPCC that was released in March that calls for urgent action is not of a surprise, of course. But what it says is that the resources are out there. We know that there are trillions of dollars in savings that need to be channeled for climate action. And specifically for the region, we need to mobilize between 4 to 8 times the resources that we currently mobilize for climate action. Just to give you a sense, in 2022, as IDB Group, not only the private sector part, which I work in, but also the public sector part, we lent $7.8 billion for climate action. But that's a drop in the bucket compared to what's really needed for climate action. We're talking about, in a recent estimation on the NDC implementation for the region, is between $430 billion to $2.5 trillion yearly from 2030 onward if we want to reach a net zero world. So that's a lot of resources. And so on the one hand, we know that the scale of the resources are there, but we do have an advantage as an MDB, or working even in the public sector and the private sector, and the synergies between the different windows, to work with governments to establish the policies that can unlock more resources and private sector investment, and can work with the private sector to generate the knowledge, the information, the conditions for the private sector to then replicate once the model is set and proved to be moved to scale. And also we have another important tool that is to redirect or try to incentivize resources to go towards Paris Agreement. That's why from January 1st, 2023, all of our new operations in the public and the private sector are going to be Paris aligned, and that the guidelines on what it means for IDB Group to be Paris aligned were just released yesterday. So you can go on the website and you can see what it means. But the bottom of it is that we want to help transition to a low carbon and resilient economy. Our role is to support private clients and governments to do this transition together. And it depends on the conditions of each country. As you know, the UNFCCC talks about common but differentiated responsibilities, what it basically means that each country has different capacities and abilities to achieve their goal in the Paris Agreement. And so we want to work with our clients to support that transition. So how do we do that in IDB Invest? So I think that we have 3 main areas of work that we try to promote within climate action. First, and one topic that is very important for us, is to work with financial institutions. Even large financial institutions are co-lenders like JP Morgan or PIMCO, but also domestic capital markets. We need to work with financial institutions, financial intermediaries, microfinance institutions, to teach them and to work with them into designing sustainable strategies. And not only on the climate angle, but also on the social angle. I think that for Latin America, working together, the social and the climate angle is very, very important, because just transition is a concept that is very relevant for the region as well. So working with financial institutions and promoting sustainable investments is very important, and it's one of the lines of work, where we also developed new asset classes like thematic bonds, and those thematic bonds can be green, can be blue, can be sustainability linked bonds or outcome-based bonds, but it's basically doing the structure to promote a specific outcome or performance. The second line of action has to do with testing new business model, investing in technologies, working in green hydrogen or bifacial solar panels or wind farm, offshore wind farms, etc. So it's just trying to see from the mitigation point of view, what are the technologies that can be promoted in the region, and how can we bring other actors, other big banks that may not have the capacity to have a view or the ESG due diligence capacity that we have being across the region, and so work with them to have a joint and collaborative process and product, a financial product at the end. So that would be the second line of action. And the third line of action that we do in this whole strategy that we call investing in reversing is adaptation. I think that the region, as we heard before, resiliency is critical for the region, and working in incorporating resiliency and identifying, because many times the private sector companies that we have, they are doing resiliency or they are doing adaptation, but they haven't called it that way. Working with them to identify what's resiliency and trying to put a price to that, it's very important to support resiliency in the region. In addition to the specific investments, we're working in the public sector with providing hurricane law clauses for stopping the principal payments when a hurricane hits a country. And in the private sector, we have what we call the climate clause, which is also another way to support private sector companies to recover after a natural disaster hit. So that's our general strategy, but in the conversations that we've had across all the MDBs, and because we know that in Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan was the first time that IFIs were called to think about how can we mobilize more resources, one of the conversations we've had across MDBs is that we need to work at country level. We need to design country level platforms where we can talk to each other and see how can we combine the work between all the MDBs that work, for example, in the case of Uruguay, and how can we complement each other to get the best result and outcomes in the country. And so that's one of the proposals that we have moving forward as MDBs. And finally, as IDB Invest specifically, we have learned a lot about mobilization. We have learned a lot what it takes to mobilize more private capital in the region, and we want to use that further. We want to be the conduit of private capital to investment, and so we are currently in conversations to increase our capital to be able to do more of that. So with that, I'll pass it on to Dan.
Thanks, Helen. So we'll turn it to Lupin Rahman. She will discuss PIMCO's ESG investment strategy, its execution in LATAM, and any comments on the role of MDBs.
Okay, thanks very much. So for everyone's information, as background, PIMCO is an asset management company. We're focused on fixed income investments. We have about 1 trillion in assets under management. In terms of threshold effects, there are clearly threshold effects, and part of it is just the way indices like the ESG and the regular EM indices are built. You need a minimum size of 500 million to be part of the index, and there are other categories, and that kind of catalyzes investors to not only purchase the instrument, but also do additional credit work, research, understand what the longer term challenges are. So, I think that in the bank loan market, you can have smaller sizes and still have allocations to very specialized asset managers, but that threshold effect is something that can be a source of engagement with the benchmark providers. So that's on the kind of small issue, the small new issue size question, and it is an important one. When it comes to just thinking about the challenges related to a lot of the KPIs and the outcomes versus processes and inputs, these are challenges for sure. And as the asset management industry is getting more aware about ESG instruments and essentially using paid subscriptions to third-party providers to help them improve in terms of their technical awareness, I think that it can be resolved to some extent. In terms of the long-term nature of some of these outcomes, you can design instruments which have periodic markers along the life of the instrument. So there are challenges, but there are some solutions. It's not a complete fix, but we can use some tools to try and overcome them.
Thanks, Helen.
Thank you for the questions. Well, in addition to the conversation about blended finance, I think that the point on what we define blended finance is very important. When we talk about blended finance, we refer to using donor resources that we have under management to be able to provide it to specific transaction for a short period of time to resolve a market barrier. Is it a lack of information? Is it a first mover that we're trying to resolve that to make or to demonstrate the case for that technology or that business model? So the blended finance in that regard has a specific role, but there's also an important part, I think, that it's lumped into together, that is the grant resource that it has to do with capacity building, with the design of all the studies that Dan was talking about. And the grant resources also come a lot of times from donor resources, or the IDB, the public sector side, has some of their own resources. And it's important for project preparation, because otherwise we continue having that conversation of we want to mobilize a lot of resources and then where are the projects, right? And so that's the issue with blended finance. I think we have to distinguish it between grant and also blended finance that you use it for a small period of time. In terms of the Caribbean, actually we had yesterday a conversation between our president and all the ministers of finance and the PM Mia Motley, talking about what could we do in the Caribbean? How can we scale the work in the Caribbean? And a lot of it was use existing, for example, institution like the CARICOM Development Fund, but also try to talk about structures that could bring together all the needs of the region. And they were talking about climate change, they were talking about food security, but also private sector investment in transportation. Those were the key issues that came across. But definitely we do have a role. We see the working with the Caribbean as important, and that's why we have a specific target at IDB Invest to lend 10% of our lending has to go to the Caribbean. And for that, we need a lot of upstream work and a lot of project preparation. Comes back to the point of grant resources, because what we have discovered is that we need to work with regional and local sponsors to get them to the point of having a bankable project, which takes time, but having the goal and having the target, it allows us to focus and have investment officers focus on getting those deals done. In terms of the KPIs, I just wanted to say that it's very important that transparency and seeing what's the result of a lot of these assets is really important. That's why we launched the Green Bond Transparency Platform a couple of years ago, and you can track it. It's an online, it's a public good that private and public sector issuers put there, how they're doing with their KPIs, what their achievement is. So you can track in terms not only on the specific timing of the bond, but later on. And to the last point of the sustainability linked bond, In the conversation that we've had with clients where we offer the idea of the sustainability linked bond, it's because they want to do more. They have a commitment as a company to decarbonize, or they have a commitment to increase their green procurement. But they also need working capital, for example. And so the way that the sustainability linked bond works is that it allows you to respond to the short-term need of the company right now of a working capital loan, but with making sure that you have a KPI that it links to the commitment of the company to be net zero, to increase resiliency, or what have you, depending on the context of the corporate. So yes, you're right that it's a long-term view, but if you match the specific needs today with a long-term view, sustainability-linked bonds or loans are the way to go.
Azucena?
Thank you. So maybe I'll start with this last point, the sustainability linked bond, not for the corporates, but for the sovereigns. I think that it's true. The real reason that you issue this kind of bonds is to show your commitment, your true commitment to environmental issues. And the idea is very simple. You don't use those proceeds into something specific that goes to whatever you want to finance your budget, but at the end of the day, in the case of the sovereign, you need to reach certain indicators that are agreed in the Paris Agreement. It is true what you said. It could be the case that you don't reach those objectives and you end in a position that you have to pay more. You're in a bad position, let's say, because you didn't reach your targets and you have to pay more. And of course, that you have to price that in. You have to be capable of paying that step up in the coupon. But your point is simple, but it's very important. It's true. Then I'm not going to speak about blended finance, but there was this question of how to think out of the box. And I want to once again come with idea to emphasize what Uruguay is working with the World Bank, because we really are sure that this is a very innovative instrument where we can match the need for resources to allocate into environmental issues. I think that the idea of having not only a step-down coupon, it's very important, so that we have a positive incentives and that this will help other countries to move their way into a greener recovery. So this is one of the many points that are within the evolution framework from the World Bank, but we are convinced that this is a very important instrument. I won't say the only one. This is there's not only a unique solutions to these very complex problems, but I do insist our country, our chair, as middle-income countries, as Latin America, we do insist that this is a very convenient way to go, where we ask developed countries to share their responsibility in the emission of greenhouse gases, and they contribute in the step down for the rest of the countries. And let me, as a final comment, react to one of Dan's points, so that we go back to old discussions that we used to have. You said that there is enough economics so that we do not need any concession. So I have some differences there. I think that I would say that in the case of the multilaterals, in the evolution framework from the World Bank, I go back to the point I just mentioned. I think it's important to have this concession, and that the concession comes from developed countries. I think that it's also an opportunity for developed countries to come up with the pledges that they have come with pledges. Well, now they need to put the money where the mouth is, and they have to put resources there. And when it comes to capital markets, I agree that there is economics, but I think that we are still missing some parts of the economics in that market. Of course, Uruguay issued the sustainability linked bond. That means that there is economics. There are, however, room to improve. there was this mentioning about how to measure the indicators, and it's true that there are solutions and a lot of progress has been done to measure these key performance indicators, and there are institutions that particularly measure this, validate this, and so on. I think that there is room for the ratings, the rating agencies to incorporate more and more ESG elements into the methodology. I think that there is room for index provider like JP Morgan, that you have come with a MB adjusted by the performance in environmental issues. I think that's very good, and we need more of those indicators. I think that we need to have a broader fiduciary duty in terms that for funds that manage assets. It's not only the coupon that matters. It's not only the return, the direct return. I think that the duty should be broader so that the funds accept a step down and consider that that means that the country is doing well. Going back to your question, if there is a step down, the country is doing well, that means that the quality of that credit is good. That means the price of that bond is better. So I think there's a lot of things that we all have to work together and to finally walk the talk. Thank you.
Thanks. And just taking it from there to wrap up the panel, I think there's a lot of financial engineering, a lot of work on putting together projects, a lot of work of bringing private capital into financing this agenda. And I think that will be a significant push to move this agenda forward, but linking it to the speech by Prime Minister Motley and these words by Azucena and the four panelists here, there's also a significant role to fighting a global challenge where there are huge externalities that have to be played by governments. The Inflation Reduction Act in the US demonstrates the logic in the US that you need sovereign balance sheets to really move this agenda forward. So there will be a significant need to generate this fiscal space in developing and emerging markets together with this financial engineering to attract private capital into this market. So both sides, the financial engineering and the political engineering, will be needed to address this global challenge. And with that, I thank, our four panelists to make a space in their very busy agenda these weeks to be here with us to discuss this issue. Thanks.